the Emotion at Work podcast where we plake. Let me try that one again. Hello and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotions at the heart of the people, the processes, and the place of work. And today I think we're going to touch on all three. I think we're definitely going to delve into the emotions in the people element of work. And I think we're also going to dive into the processes and the place too. And why do I say that? Well, it's because our guest is an expert in leadership psychology and biology, so that kind of mind and body interface, and they've got a wealth of experience in implementing behavioral change for individuals and for teams and organizations as a whole. They're a coach, a consultant, a renowned speaker with a master's in marketing and management, and also broader kind of training and development beyond that. And it is a pleasure to welcome to the Emotional Work podcast, Rachel Edmondson Clark. Hi Rachel, how are you?
Hi, Phil. I'm doing really well, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I want to just say at the outset how much I appreciate you very unapologetically and intentionally talking directly about emotions at work, because within my sphere of leadership development, it is such a key, crucial, fundamental part of leadership behaviours, and yet I think it is widely misunderstood, and I just love the fact that you come straight and direct at the topic.
Oh, thank you so much. That's lovely to hear. Thank you so much. That gives me all the warm fuzzies. That does. That's lovely.
It's meant. Yeah, it's intended.
Oh no, thank you. Because the organisation actually. So when I first founded the company back in 2011, it wasn't called Emotional Work. It was in 2017 that we rebranded it, because I think at the beginning I was a little bit scared and a bit nervous to put it there. So initially the company was called E3, Consultancy, Training and Coaching, and the E3 stood for Emotion, Evidence and Experience. So kind of emotion was in there, but it was like hidden away, I suppose, in a way, or like it was at the second level. And it was in 2017 that I actually tried to put on a conference, which absolutely tanked. So maybe I need to pull on your marketing expertise to find out why that tanked. But we called the conference Emotion at Work. And at that point I thought, oh, you know what? Actually, that's just a brilliant name for the company. And so in 2017, we rebranded the company into Emotion at Work. And then we've just sort of led with it since then. So that means a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
It's really important. It's really important stuff. It is, as I say, it's fundamental to how we behave, the actions that we take, the decisions that we make. And if we want better results in life, in business, in work, in anything, then it comes back to this level of thought, feeling and belief. So, Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so as always with the Emotional World podcast, then we open with our unexpected yet innocuous question. And the title of today's episode is about meaning and moments that matter at work. And so I wanted to take that as inspiration for my unexpected question. So for you then, Rachel, what is a moment that brings you warmth?
I think for me, it's a moment of connection, and that can be with anyone. But the moments of connection, I quite consciously seek out regularly, or seek to create. I think not to seek out, but I seek to create them regularly. Will be moments with my children. Because it gets. I've got two young children, and you get busy, don't you? And you're rushing out to school in the mornings, or you're thinking about the day ahead. And I'll very consciously want to be present with them, even if it's just it takes seconds, but just to look them in the eye, to have that hug, to say good morning, to connect in that way. That gives me a huge amount. Or when they come home from school, just that gives me a deep sense of warmth and gratitude, that connection.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that sounds fantastic. And I love the intentionality that sits behind that. So one of the things that I talk about a lot with individuals and teams that I work with is, so the example I use is, I want you to open up your calendar for the working week. And where in that calendar have you got things that will restore you? things that bring you joy, or things that make you feel good, or things that really help you be well, whether that be kind of exercise or meeting with somebody who you really like and you really get on with and you find helpful to engage with.
Yes.
Where in your working week are those moments of kind of restorative or constructive connections or activities or whatever it might be? Because that kind of opting into doing things that help you will help you then work with your emotions in a more constructive way. Because if you're constantly moving from things that you might find challenging or difficult or tricky or tough, or even you're vaguely ambivalent to, if those are the activities that are making up your week, it's going to be really hard for you to then have that emotional resilience when you need it. So it's about kind of, whether you want to call filling your cup or whether you want to call it topping up your tank or whatever it may be, those moments of restorative or
restoration.
Restoration is a really, really important. So I love the intentionality that you've got in that, because that's going to give you that kind of that buzz, that warmth, that restorative element to it. So no, I really appreciate that. That's lovely.
And I think we can get wrapped up in thinking that these moments of restoration, or that we've got to go to the gym, or we've got to do something that's going to take a specific amount of time. But actually, it can be woven into the fabric of our day. We can have a conversation with some people while we take a walk outside in daylight, in nature, and we also maybe get to that connection as well, dependent if that person is somebody who, as you said, fills your cup, is somebody who you care about and who cares about you. So I think it's important to recognise that we need to restore, and that restoring doesn't have to be get to the weekend or get to the holiday, but can be woven into I really like this word integrated. People talk a lot about work-life balance, but actually I think that suggests almost that something, that it could tip either way very easily. I far prefer the word and to think about it as work-life integration. How do we integrate that restorative care within our working day? And it doesn't have to be big things. It can actually be small moments that take a few seconds, like we're just talking about with the kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember there was someone I used to work with called Steve, who had just very different approach to me. So very different outlook. I mean, for anyone that's kind of done personality profiling stuff, there was some introversion, there was some detail, there was some logic and specific and facts and details, and less attention given to emotion and connection and kind of creativity and big picture thinking. And they were very organized, and I'm quite last minute. So my preference is, if you're thinking about Myers-Briggs, of extroversion, intuition, feeling and perceiving, or ENFP, and this Steve was certainly exhibited lots of preferences for introversion, sensing, thinking and judging. And so I knew that if Steve and I had a day together, I needed to have connection with somebody who I feel like I could bounce off and I feel like I could connect with, because that would really help me just kind of come out of what would be quite a draining day. Not draining because Steve was difficult or obstinate or hard. It's just that I was having to flex a lot. I knew I was having to flex a lot into preferences that don't necessarily work for me. So having that restorative bit afterwards was really important. And then there was a couple of colleagues that I worked with who I knew that if I went to sit in their office for 20 minutes and have a chat about what's going on for them, I would feel much better as a result. And then off I would go. So.
Yeah. I love that, and I love the awareness there as well, isn't it? And that's I think is so important, that recognition and awareness of what we need, and and if we are feeling, as you were saying, and even you predict you're going to spend the day with Steve, that you're going to feel like that, then what are then the measures that you put in place? Love that, really good.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about we didn't. I spoke about in the introduction that kind of interplay of leadership, psychology, and biology, and so for our listeners, then tell me a bit more about how those topics interlink for you, and or why those are important.
So I think the reason why it's so important is because actually in my past, I've got this wrong as a leader. And I think we all cognitively know that our minds are not separate from our bodies. And yet there is a lot of talk in culture and in organizations about positive and growth mindset. You've got to have the growth mindset, you've got to have the positive mindset. And I think we are at risk at forgetting how our physical state affects our mental health and our ability to perform and to sustainably perform well. And I see this, and I was one of these leaders that would sort of walk around the office while trying to shovel something into a mouth at lunchtime, that might miss breakfast. I see leaders now where they will sit all day, particularly since we've become so much more of a hybrid working place, making poor food choices, whether that is the regularity of eating or what they're choosing, to eating it, and sleep, and sleep that gets disrupted. And I think together the psychology and the biology provide a much more comprehensive picture of what leaders need to foster to be more anti-fragile in themselves and to enable high performance in their teams. And I think when we understand both, leaders can approach challenges in a way that is scientifically backed, but also deeply human as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so when you think back then to that version of you at the time who was shoveling food in at lunchtime and maybe kind of not considering these things, and recognizing that our own individual experience is only ever going to be that. It's our own individual experience. And at the same time, I'm really interested in yours. So how did that show up for you in terms of your performance, your mental health, your kind of well-being? When you look back at it, and maybe there's an element of perspective and distance. And at the same time, I think it'd be, really interesting to get into. How did the way that you were engaging kind of with yourself biologically, how did that impact you then? Mental health, well-being, performance-wise.
I think I paid far too much, and I put far too much emphasis on I can master my emotions, like I know how to do this, and forgetting that takes an enormous amount of executive brain power, and that and that recognizing that when you know all this, Phil, so well. I know, So when we recognise that we're feeling something, it's a signal. It's a signal to us, and actually having that conversation with myself: is this mood related, or is this, and is it an internal biofeedback signal to me that actually something's out of balance or not quite right? From a inside of me perspective, or is it? And I'm oversimplifying this. I really am oversimplifying. Or is this emotion? And is this an external feedback loop? Is this an external thing that's happened? Someone or something has said or done something that has led me to have an emotional reaction. Of course, those two are interlinked. And if you, I think the challenge is that, and this is where I got with my situation. I hadn't realised that my mood was so under-restored, because I think mood can really creep up on us. I think emotions, we often feel them more acutely, like if we're frustrated or we're angry, we kind of know that they're happening. But mood can be something that's far more underlying, and it can creep up on us over time. And I think where I'd fallen down was that I hadn't realised my mood was so under-restored that I was then just trying to sort of push through with the executive brain power of going, with the positive mindset, and I can do this, and constantly feeling like I was actually failing or falling short, even though I kind of knew all of this stuff. And if I go way back, kind of probably 13, no more years, 14, 15 years or more now, that was, it led to a complete case of burnout for me, a complete case of burnout. Yeah.
I don't want to pry. So is that something you'd be willing for us to go into a little bit more?
Feel free to. I'm an open book, Phil. You go for it.
So what? Because I guess one option could be for me to ask a big question, and I'm going to try and ask a sequence of smaller questions instead, maybe. So one of the things I loved how you just distinguished between emotion and mood, because they are very different things. Because a mood is much more, it's not as enduring as, say, a trait, and it's nowhere near as enduring as something that might be a disorder and having a debilitating impact on somebody's well-being or life. And emotions are really brief. Emotions are sort of seconds and minutes, whereas moods can go on for like hours. And like you said, you can just be in a Mardi. For anyone who's vaguely in the Midlands of England, then a Mardi means you're just in a grumpy.
We know what Mardi means. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't when I lived in Bristol. Now I live in Lincoln. I now know. But when my wife or girlfriend at the time said to me, "Why are you more Mardi?" I was like, I don't know what that means. Anyway, so yeah, being in, I think you're right. Being in a mood can catch up on you, and also you talked about that executive function and trying to kind of push through that. So I'm linking those two things together in asking, when did you become aware of the burnout?
Way back then, I became aware of the burnout when I collapsed. So
physically collapsed.
I physically collapsed.
Wow.
I was in my glass fronted office. I was about to go into the boardroom, and instead of walking out the door, I found myself lying on the floor looking up at the ceiling tiles. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening to me. It absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was at that point that it was at that point that I was like, oh my God, something's got to change. So knowing what I knew about emotions even back then, I knew to take a moment to focus completely on my breath, and I was able to start to breathe again, and get myself up off the floor and then go and get help. But I've since met people who have been stopped in their tracks in more severe ways, where they have found themselves paralyzed for 3 months. So our body has a way of making us stop if we don't listen. But that was how I knew.
Wow.
And I think the thing that I've learned from that now is not to ever let it get to that. So if I'm again being brutally honest, I have tendencies to overwork sometimes, and I'm getting much better at that. But I still have to watch out, and so it's never ever got that bad again. But sometimes, there are things that I can see in physically in my body. Perhaps it's some eczema might come up, for example.
Okay.
And I know it's a signal. It's time to slow down. It feels really counter. Sorry, it feels really counter. I just want to share this. It feels really counterintuitive sometimes to slow down, because it's at that point where work is really busy, or things are stressful, or you just feel like you can't slow down. And it feels like, although cognitively you might know that's the right thing to do, feels like either you can't, or if you do, you will fail, or you'll make something worse, or you'll be judged, and all of that then builds up, and so you continue to work harder or stay up later, and that's where you've really got to break that cycle.
Okay. And is there something else or something more on that in particular that you'd like to share before I ask my next question?
breaking that cycle is hard. It's not easy. But what I found with practice and experimentation is that even when you feel like you can't take the break, you take the break, you put the restorative self-care in, you actually come back and you perform better. It improves then your cognitive ability, your emotional resources to deal with the stress, to be able to manage and dance elegantly with whatever is showing up for you in those moments, whether it be with your team, with people. And it's so critical to performance. But you kind of have to do the thing you don't feel like doing and take that time and do those things and experience it, I think, to really understand the power of it. So I'd encourage people they're not maybe going to feel like doing it, but encourage you to do it anyway and see how you come back sharper, fitter, better as a result.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I guess the moment then for you where you I don't know, I can't remember what the question I asked was now, but it was that moment where you collapsed then. And what you've noticed now is that there are other signals that your body will give you to tell you, hang on a minute, you need to look out here. I think the example you gave was maybe some eczema might form. And it's probably maybe it's an unfair and unhelpful question to ask. And because I framed it in that way, you might think, well, Phil, why are you even bothering to ask it? Because the reason what I'm going to ask is about your individual experience, and your experience will be different to others, because
of course,
everyone's situation and experiences are different. And at the same time, there is value, I think, in hearing about someone's lived experience of something, because there may be something that resonates for you. And because something happened for me or for you, it might be different to what happens for somebody else. So I suppose what I'm trying to signal to the audience or to our listeners in particular is what might follow from the question I'm about to ask could be distinctly different to what you might experience, or it might be distinctly different to what you hear from others. And at the same time, I think there's value in hearing how it was for you, Rachel, if that's okay. So I will now ask my question after all of that preamble and context setting.
I love it. I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
So what were the things that your body, how did your body try and tell you that you were heading to burnout, that when you look back now, you can go, oh, there was one. What were the signals that you missed at that time? Or maybe you didn't miss, maybe you dismissed. You noticed them, but then you're like, oh no, I just kind of plow on. So yeah, what were the signals that you missed or dismissed in the build up to that burnout?
Yeah, no, I'd adopted patterns. I'd adopted patterns of behaviour that had meant that I was disrespecting my body. I think, as I said, I was shoveling food as I walked around the office because I was too busy to stop for lunch. I was working late because my diary was, not holding or supporting boundaries for myself because I was allowing my calendar to be full of meetings for the whole day. So my work started when everyone else went home at 5 or 5:30, because that was the time for me to get things then done and followed up and prepped for the next day, which meant that I neglected the most important relationship in my life. I mean, at this time in my life, and bless him, he is now my husband, but I put our wedding off 2 years on the trot because I was too busy to get married. I mean, wow. They started to call me the runaway bride at work. So I was depleted. I was enormously depleted because of these habits of how I was just working long hours, disrespecting what my body really needed, and neglecting the most important relationship in my life. And I think those, that's the signals, that I now know, and I'm so much more aware of now, but was less aware of back then, was the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the ability not to easily confused, or kind of not able to sort of not able to comprehend or understand how best to attack something or approach something or someone. I became immensely disconnected with myself during that time. We talked about connection earlier and what brings you warmth. And I think a huge thing that I've worked on has been connection with myself. Am I really listening to what I need and what I know in my heart is right as well?
And again, maybe an unfair question to ask. How might your colleagues have helped you at that time? So I suppose that where's that question is coming from, that you were called the runaway bride. I was like, okay, so clearly people were noticing then. So people were noticing behaviors that you were doing and then making a joke of it, which is often what I know our audience is from all over the globe, but in Britain in particular, if you're nervous about, if you see some behavior and you're not sure what to do with it and you don't know how to approach it with somebody, you just make a joke out of it, because if you make light of it, it minimizes what you're trying to do. So I'm not saying that's what your colleagues did, but I could interpret it in that way. And I suppose maybe, like I said, it's an unfair question to ask in terms of, because you don't know then necessarily what would have worked for you. And at the same time, I'm going to ask anyway, what do you think might have got your attention if your colleagues tried to do something to say, you know what, Rachel, we're a bit worried about you?
I wish somebody would. And I'm going to share something now I've not shared with a lot of people. But at one point, I knew inside that I was really struggling, and I would get ready for work in the morning. And I can distinctly remember there being a day where I put dark eyeshadow underneath my eyes, and I didn't put my full makeup on, because I so desperately wanted somebody to come and say to me, "Are you okay? How are you?" And I remember doing that day because I thought, if I look bad enough, surely someone will come and ask me if I'm okay. And no one did. And so the thing for me, and this is what you did so beautifully when we had our first call and our planning call for this, was, how are you? And sometimes you need to ask that question twice, because we have that default response, and then there's the pause and actually, how are you? And that would have meant that would have allowed me, I think, at that stage to then have opened up and said, I'm struggling, and I feel like I'm failing, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to make it right.
Wow.
Conversations are so important, and yet I think we feel so afraid that if we have that conversation, that we've got to be some kind of therapist or expert in what's that person going to bring up, what are they going to tell me, am I going to be able to cope with that? And Phil, you said this at the outset before we started recording, and that was about listening. We were talking about just the skill of listening and how important it is. And I think it would be to remind people that if you can just be there to listen, to hold that space for somebody to be able to talk, you haven't necessarily got to be able to fix it. You can help them find other people that might be able to help fix it. But also sometimes, I think you mentioned your wife, actually, just listening for her is sometimes that is all we need. That's enough. Sometimes listening is enough.
I wrote a piece for, I can't remember who it's for now. I think it was for Training Journal, maybe. And I talked about three steps. And one was pay attention. The second one was ask questions, and the third one was stop fixing. Because the idea that someone comes to you and says, "I'm finding this difficult." Ah, okay, difficult how? And see what you get, and then is there something that I can do to help you?
Yeah.
Is there something you need from me? No, great. And I agree with you in that my experience is the often the biggest help you can be to someone is just is allowing them to share and express whatever it is that they're thinking or feeling. And the way I sometimes describe it is that when someone's holding on to something, it will be a weight in some way. So some people might feel that weight on their shoulders, it kind of pulls them down. Some people might feel it as a weight on their mind. Some people might feel it as a weight in their chest, or they might feel it as something that's just here, just below. So I need to move some of my camera. So there's this bit at the base of your kind of neck, just above your breastplate, called the suprasternal notch. And it's that place often where emotion will get stuck. So it's kind of trying to come up, it just gets stuck there. It can't quite make it up the larynx and out of the mouth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it could be it could be a weight there. And what we as people in the workplace in particular don't need to do is we don't need to take on other people's weight. We just need to help them take it off and put it down somewhere. So when somebody expresses whatever that is, that weight can come off, and I can hold it in a conversation in terms of going, okay, well, look at that. Yeah, I can. Wow, I completely understand that struggling that you've got there, and what you're finding difficult, and how you see and experience that as really difficult. Wow. And what help do you need from me with that? Nothing. Okay. And how are you feeling now? Better. And then I can just get great. And then I can just put it down over here. And I can leave it. And it will just slowly kind of dissipate and go away. What I don't need to do is then take that discomfort or whatever it is and then put it on me, because I don't need to. It's okay. It's there. We've looked at it and we've gone, oh, great. And then we can put it down and just be all of the Elsa and just let it go.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love a bit of Frozen. Oh, it's so true though. We need to let these things move through us, and if we, if we are regularly restoring and looking after ourselves, then how are we resolving that, that emotion, and being careful not to regulate that for too long? I think, like you're saying, it gets stuck somewhere, and then we start to regulate, and that's not healthy either. That leads to physical, as it did with me, physical, mental problems. It can lead to departure and burnout, and even people, I don't say this lightly, the substance abuse, be it coffee, be it something more serious, there's all of that stuff that comes in. So being able to resolve that, how we're feeling emotionally, I think is so important. I think there's such a huge majority of the population and the workforce at the moment is either mostly, I think, unsettled. A lot of people, struggling, and some even in crisis. And I think there's a huge amount of the population that is definitely sitting in that unsettled camp. And actually, we want to be thinking about, from a mental health perspective, how people move into, that sort of the flourishing, high performance, thriving space. But sadly, it's not actually many of us. If you look at your teams, if you look at the people that you know and that you see around you, sadly, it's not that many of us that are in that, that are in that flourishing and thriving space. And the things that we are talking about here, the constant and integrated a restoration of mood and then the being able to resolve emotions is absolutely critical and key to that sustainable high performance and being able to manage our behaviors and our actions and to perform at our best. And the other thing that I think often gets missed from a corporate perspective, particularly with leaders, is that they don't realize that by doing that, it has these two parallel outcomes which are so important. So on one hand, you've got individuals who have the resources cognitively, metabolically, emotionally to be able to perform at their best. But then from an organizational cultural perspective, you're creating then environments where people can be, feel psychologically safe and where they're engaged and there's diversity and that's embraced. And, I think people think there's two different things and it's not. It's back to what we were saying right at the beginning. This whole feelings piece is fundamental, foundational to what a lot of businesses and teams and good leaders that are out there are trying to do. And I think we just need to demystify it.
And I think that gives me a really nice link then into how do you do that then? So we talked about how you support individuals, you support leaders, you support organizations. So what would be an approach that you take or something that you do where you find ways to help people have those moments of connection, those moments of meaning, those moments that matter? How do you go about doing that?
I suppose so. I think if you've got good habits of self-care and you're role modeling that for your team as well, you're encouraging the breaks, the getting outside, the daylight, the eating well, all of that good stuff. I think that's important. I think leaders can role model so much. And just by them doing it themselves, they are giving people permission and they are showing that this is the way that we do things around here. I think that's really important. I think celebrating the successes and the progress along the way is also something that I think can be enormously helpful. I think there's often a friction, isn't there, between you have this space where you're dissatisfied with where you are because you've not got the results or you're not where you want to be yet, and yet actually we also know the power of gratitude and of of being in that place of there's this healthy dissatisfaction while also wanting to, be satisfied with where we are at as well. And that can cause, I think, some tension because it's healthy for us to feel like we're in a good spot. So I think with that, it's about teams and individuals being able to recognize the progress that they're making. And again, I think we go so quickly in life from one thing to the next. And I've had a coach in my life, more than one coach, for the last 10, 15 years. And one of the things that coaching relationship gives me is it gives me this opportunity to kind of go, okay, just to take a look. Well, where have you come? Because sometimes the result isn't there, but there's been so much progress that's been made, and there's just a lag time between that progress that's been made and the result that's going to come. And that can sometimes be a bit disconcerting. So I'm labouring this point a little bit, maybe, but I think to recognise the progress along the way is really important.
And how do you help individuals or teams do that then? I guess you what you described there as your coach helps you do that. So how do you do that with how do you do that with individuals or teams then is help them recognize those successes and that progress and have that gratitude and appreciation?
it's building it in. It's just building it into part of the everyday kind of conversations. So if I'm working with somebody one-on-one, one of the ways I will always start my coaching conversations will be, right, let's have 3 things that we're grateful for, or wins since we last caught up. And again, that's a really easy thing for any leader to do in one-to-ones, or as part of team meetings. It just becomes part of what you're focused on, doesn't it? And it's about creating that habit of focus and of the questions that you're asking as a leader, and to do it for yourself as well. When you go to bed at night, what can I, what am I pleased? What am I pleased I did today? How did I make the difference that I wanted to make? And or how am I learning from today that means it's an investment for tomorrow? These are all good questions. I think that the challenge often is that we don't ask ourselves very good quality questions sometimes. So I think again, back to awareness and back to recognition, what are the questions that you're asking yourself? What are the questions that you're asking your team? And actually, you only need a handful of really good ones, and just get used to using them a lot. And it becomes second nature.
Yeah, I love that. So 3 good things is something that as an emotional work team, we do regularly. So regularly we'll do, what have been 3 good things this week. And also that kind of sharing of appreciation. So I had a couple of days this week in London with one of the team, and we did, what we appreciated and what we're grateful for over the last couple of days. So we did that as like the checkout before we came home yesterday. So, definitely.
And if I may just bring this back to children here as well, and I know you'll know this, Phil, but again, it's just a reminder for listeners. It's like with children, we know, don't we, that when they're learning to walk or when they're learning to do something, what do? We give them all this encouragement. And somehow, somewhere along the way, when we became adults, we kind of forgot that was important. But we're no different, and actually having that that regular kind of support, encouragement, and check-in is useful and helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I had a discussion with a very senior leader in a construction firm, where he said, I don't need to thank people for doing their job. That's what they're paid for. I said, oh, that's really interesting. Would you be willing to explore that some more? And where it took us was down a really interesting sort of discussion about where in the workplace, or where in workplaces would you expect that to happen or not? So as an example, I said, if you walk into a hotel and it's the type of hotel that has a doorman, a door person, a doorman, or, somebody who's looking after the door, and they hold the door open for you, would you say thank you to that person? Yes. Okay. So similar question then. I could argue that individual that's held the door open for you is doing their job. That's what they're paid to do. So what's different about you thanking that individual for holding the door open for you as compared with thanking the individual that has done the task that you pay them to do? And well, that's different. Okay. Different how?
Yeah, brilliant question.
It took us then a really interesting discussion. We didn't agree at the end, and I'm okay with it that we didn't agree. And I find it fascinating that there seemed to be like a threshold of when that appreciation or gratitude can be expressed, to do with going above and, that classic above and beyond phrase. If somebody does something above expectation or beyond kind of roles and responsibilities, or that if you do that extra, that's where the gratitude and the appreciation comes in for doing your job. Then you're paid to do that. And my reflection was around, so what does that say about the culture of the team and or the organization then? Because if we only thank or appreciate when somebody goes above and beyond, how will I view the everyday? So will I view the everyday with care, with consideration, with importance, with diligence? if the only time I get appreciated or recognized is when I do something above, when I do something beyond what the expectation is. I said, because for me, the risk is I then start to perform the day to day, because the argument might be that the performative gratitude is you get paid. So therefore my performative performance will be, I'll do what I need to do. I'll do enough to do what I need to do. And the risk is this might sound like me advocating for everybody should be like, working super hard and working extra hours or whatever it might be. And that's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm posing is a discussion or a consideration of how does as a leader or my teams or my organization's approach to appreciation and the expression of appreciation and gratitude, how does that then influence the extent to which people will care and bring diligence and consideration and those things to the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Because my concern is if we only express gratitude and appreciation for the stuff that's above and beyond the day-to-day,
yes,
that the level of consideration, diligence, care to the day-to-day then will become performative, because that's what the appreciation and the recognition is. It's performative. I perform the payroll. I run the payroll, rather than showing and expressing that appreciation, gratitude. Sorry, I feel like I've turned this into the Phil Wilcox show.
No, it's really interesting. No. It's really interesting, and there's a number of things that is you've raised, or that's kind of made me think. I think the first thing is when we're talking about celebrating the progress, actually that can be just giving ourselves credit, and that's a huge part of the work I do with one-on-one clients, is actually just getting them to celebrate themselves. Because what happens is you go, oh yeah, okay, so you work really hard on a project or a presentation or something that's coming up, or even a difficult conversation, right? And then you do that thing, and then it's kind of like, right, next thing, and you go straight on. And so I think there's something here about external validation versus internal validation, and I think it's really important for us to have a healthy balance of the two. We need the external validation because we might have blind spots that we're not noticing. But equally, we don't want to be so reliant on the external validation that we can't actually, just lean in and believe in ourselves. Like, did I behave in accordance with my values? Am I pleased with how I approach that situation, etc. That was one of the things that I was going to say. This appreciative feedback thing is huge. Now, there was a study that was done on people who were leaving business, leaving companies and leaving organizations. And one of the things that fell out of that was that 98% of these people cited, it wasn't the main reason, but it was a contributing factor, was that they didn't get enough appreciative feedback. So I think when we talk about feedback, you've got appreciative feedback, which is what we've just been talking about here. But you've also got coaching feedback, and you've got evaluation feedback. Where it's against a set of criteria. And I think there's just not enough of that appreciative feedback in the workplace, and that is something for all of us to be aware of. But then the other thing that came up, you were talking earlier about MBTI and our differences in preferences, and it also reminds me this, which is that it's like recognize people as to their own care instructions. So when I say care instructions, and I know people can't see this, I'm pulling up my jumper now and showing Phil my care label in the jumper that I'm wearing. So it's almost like we all have our own care instructions, and some people will want and need recognition along the way, and others will think, well, only recognize me if I have done a good job that's over and above, otherwise thanks, I get paid and that's it. So I think there's definitely this understanding, but going back to what we said like a few minutes ago, just going back to having that conversation. What's important to you about recognition? How do you like to be recognized? Is it would you like encouragement along the way? Is that important to you, or are you more like, no, just let me get on with the job, and when I've done it, then say thank you? I think just being able to understand our people better, so important. Anyway.
You've given me a new question to add into my question bank. So there were 4. There's now 5 questions that I want to ask. So one of my ex-bosses, a lady called Alison McIver, she was fabulous. I think I'd say the best boss I've ever had. And one of the things was on day 1, Alison asked me, "How do you want me to lead you?" It was Monday. On Friday, I want you to come back to me with the answer. How do you want me to lead you? And so I came back with an answer. And I remember being dead scared about whether I could say what I wanted to say, because what I wanted to say was, I'm really needy. Like if you can accommodate me through my needy phase, then I'll fly. But there'll be like a period of time, probably about 3 months, where I'm going to be coming to you going, am I doing okay? Am I doing all right? What can I do differently? What can I do more of? What can I do less of? What mistakes am I making? What am I doing well? But if you can get me through that, once I'm through that, I'll be like, right, I get it now. I've got it. And then I'll fly. And so she said, well, what does that look like? And I said, I can have like a weekly 1-to-1 every Friday. And I think it was about week 4. She said, Phil, I can't sustain this. Like you what you want is 2 hours of my time every Friday afternoon, and I can't sustain this. I've got other stuff I need to do. I get that you've got what I get that this is what you need to help you be successful, but I can't sustain it because it's having an impact on my ability to do work. So can we like shift this? Can we change it? So we then went to fortnightly, which then made it more manageable. And I stole that question and then I added to it, because I thought about the different components of leading that are really tricky. And so my first question was, how do you want me to lead you to be so you can be successful? Was one. And then the second one is to do with underperformance. So when your performance doesn't meet my expectations, how do you want me to tell you? And similarly, Beautiful. When my performance doesn't meet your expectations, I'll let you know how I would like you to tell me. The third one was disappointment. So when I'm disappointed with something that you've done, how do you want me to tell you? And when you're disappointed with something that I've done, how do you want to tell me? And then the one I'm going to add is the one you've just given me, which is the how do you want me to tell you when you're doing a good job? How does that? And then similarly, this is how I would like you to tell me if I'm doing a good job, because those things are important. But what I wanted to, the reason I chose it was because I found that as a leader, there were common areas of what I would find difficult to do. So I struggled to tell somebody if their performance wasn't to the standard I wanted it to be. I struggled to tell them if they're something they'd done or their behaviour disappointed me. And I wanted to use your metaphor to work with somebody as per their care instructions. So just because this is how I like to lead, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the right leadership style for you. So what do you need from me? And what I found was that what those things did is it just took a lot of the emotion away, took a lot of the fear away. Because I think when it comes to, say, somebody discussing that somebody's something has happened or somebody's performance isn't at the standards that you would expect, the fear isn't necessarily about what hasn't been done well enough. The fear is about how do I go and have that conversation. So if I can get rid of that fear of how do I have that conversation, because we've already got the rules of engagement. Back at the beginning, you said if things weren't going in the way that I wanted, you wanted me to let you know this way. So this is what I'm doing. I'm letting you know in the way that you asked me to. So and then we could go into it, and it just made those conversations so much more constructive. There was still a lot of emotion involved. There was still some upset, frustration, some concern, some annoyance, and it was easier to work with though because we knew how to navigate through that discussion, because we'd agreed that between us, rather than it just being a, clumsy or clunky thing. Yeah.
It's so important. And I think for anyone that's listening that thinks, but I've been established in my team and we've been working this way, I would encourage them to take those questions are fabulous. I've jotted them down there, Phil. I'm taking notes as you're speaking. They're fabulous questions. And it's okay to ask those questions at any time, I think, during the relationship. And I often think that sometimes when it might feel a bit awkward, sometimes laying it out a bit on the table and just sort of going, this might seem a bit, you've done it with me, this might seem unfair, or this might seem a bit of a strange thing, but I'm really looking to see how we can better work together. And I want to do this with every member of the team and understand you better. And, for us to improve that way of working. So I've got some questions for you. Up for it? And and so wherever you are in that relationship with people, I think there's the opportunity to be able to have those questions and ask those questions. Yeah, I love it.
Fab, wonderful. Thank you. That's an excellent point. Well made. Thank you. Okay. Wow, we've covered so much ground today.
We have.
So I think I'll do one more question, and then we'll move into kind of the segue into closing off the podcast, and I'll kind of stand the closing questions. I don't know what to ask. I feel like we've talked really broadly, haven't we, about so many different things. I've been making some notes. I mean, I wonder if so let's go back to the title of the podcast. So meaning and moments that matter. So maybe we kind of segue back towards that in the sense that and we could talk a bit about the power of questions now and perhaps from a leadership perspective. This is all off the top of my head, Phil. But from a leadership perspective, how actually the more we're able to ask and listen as leaders, then and ask, listen, and learn. Actually, we can be a lot more flexible and influential in our leadership. So we could just because you've got those great questions that we've just been going through. I wonder if that's a nice kind of a segue. We could bring that back to feelings as well, couldn't we? Because questions are a great teeth in. Questions are a great way to direct focus and how we feel as well. So we could bring it back to the feelings thing as well there if you wanted to. Yeah, that sounds really good.
I don't know what the question is though.
I was going to say.
So what's the question? So you got it. I've
got it. Yeah, I got it. All right. So the title of the show then is about meaning and moments that matter at work, and I wonder for the audience who are listening, either for themselves as individuals, in terms of questions that maybe not questions, maybe things they can do for themselves, or if they're a leader of a team, things they can do for their teams, or if they work with leaders and teams and organizations, things they maybe could help those people with. What might be something that we would recommend, or you would recommend for the people to think about, or maybe integrate into their something they might want to practice or try over the next, say, 7 days after they've listened to this episode of the podcast?
Well, I think building on the fabulous questions that you've just asked, then I think the more as leaders that we can ask, truly listen and learn. And when I say this, you might be a leader in your family, you may be a mother, a sister, a daughter. It doesn't have to be that it's a hierarchical thing from a workplace point of view. Anyone can lead. And I think the more that we ask, listen and learn, the less it is about us talking. That actually gives us greater flexibility, greater influence and greater impact. But here's the magic. It doesn't only give us greater influence and impact with others. The more that we can ask ourselves really good quality questions and really listen and tune into our bodies and what the signals are that we are getting from our bodies, the better we can lead ourselves as well.
Fabulous. Thank you. And if you had to give one tip for each of those three elements then, so ask, listen and learn, what would be your one tip for ask, your one tip for listen, and your one tip for learn?
Great question, Phil. I think.
Thanks.
Can I have two? Can I have two for the ask?
You can have as many. To be fair, you can have as many as you like.
Can I have two for the ask? So I will boil this down. So the preemptive one on the ask is, I think, to just be aware of what questions you are asking yourself and others, because a question will hijack the mind. If you're listening to this, and I say to you, "What colour is your mobile phone?" Like seriously, imagine we're having that conversation. Go backwards. What colour is your mobile phone? It's like your mind at that. You have to in that moment that I ask that question, you have to think about the phone and what colour it is, and So questions hijack us. So hijack your mind intelligently, but to do that, first of all, you've got to recognize what questions are you hijacking your own mind with your own thoughts, and what questions are you hijacking others' minds with as well. So unhelpful questions like, why is this so hard? Why do I always do this? Why does this always happen to me? What's wrong with me? All of these kind of questions are not helpful questions. So the part A to the ask is just to recognize what kind of questions are you asking, and are those questions capturing and hijacking your focus in a positive way, in a constructive way, in a resourceful way? Are they helping you become the person you most want to be? Are they helping you achieve your goals, or not? And if they're not, then I would encourage you to look and to ask a better quality question. Now, there's lots of better quality questions, and I'm just thinking, Phil, I could probably dig something out that we could put underneath this podcast sheet with some helpful questions that people can ask in all sorts of different situations and scenarios. And it won't be an extensive list, but it may get you started. So. So the number one tip there really around ask is to ask better questions, but you've got to recognize the quality of your question first, and then how do you upgrade that? How do you upgrade that question? Listening. Listen with it all is my tip. And what I mean by that is, it's not just our ears. It's everything that we see. It's everything that we feel. And body language gives away so much more than the words that we speak. And so if you see something, if you see doubt in somebody, if you see uncertainty in them, if you've really truly listened and you've really picked up on that, I would say don't be afraid to go, I could be wrong here, but I'm sensing some uncertainty or some doubt, or that maybe you're not sure about this. And to check in with them. So really listen with everything. And the learn, I think the learn one, I've got to put some fun and curiosity into this here, because I think we learn best, don't we, with a curious mind. I'm fortunate enough to have some fantastic mentors in my life, and one of the things that I love about them is that these are people who are older than me, as perhaps you might imagine, later stages of their lives. But my goodness, you look at their eyes, they sparkle, they twinkle, because they have got this sense of fun and curiosity. And so I think you've got to come at that learning with a playful, with a playful energy. And so playful energy for the learning is probably going to be my tip there.
Okay. Fabulous. Wonderful. That's a fantastic set of tips for us to come together and move into the final stage of the podcast with. All right. So what we'll do then is we'll hear Well, there's so much that we've heard in there, Rachel, which I think has just been a wonderful, wonderful conversation to have. And then what I'll do next then is take us into our final kind of stage of the podcast. And for that one, I've got another innocuous and unexpected question for you. Although if you're a big fan of the show, you'll probably have heard this one before, because it's something we normally ask at this stage, which is, what has surprised you about your kind of journey to the importance of meaning and the moments that matter? What surprised you on that journey to kind of where you are now?
I think the biggest surprise or aha for me has been that these moments, they're everywhere if you create them, and they don't have to be hard work to create. It's just about being intentional. And you said it right at the beginning. It's about being present. And if I may just embellish with a little story here.
Yeah, please.
And I'm trusting my husband won't mind me sharing this, but after the birth of our first child, I really struggled to sort of come back into that role as of wife, yes, and physical touch is high on his love languages, and it felt like that connection between the two of us, with a young baby in the house, was wider than I'd never experienced it. It just felt like a gulf between us, and I wasn't sure how to get it back, and I thought it was going to need something huge to bring it back. But what I learned in that process was that actually it didn't take anything huge. It just took, him walking in and me putting my hand on his back while he was, I don't know, maybe getting something ready for dinner, or, cuddling into him, or some backstrokes at night before bed, or, or just some words of affirmation, again, high on his level of love languages. But and if listeners haven't heard of the love languages, then definitely look that up. I'm sure we could put a link to that in the podcast notes as well. It's great, and so what I realised, and it's not just in a romantic situation, but with anybody, is that these moments of connection, these moments of warmth, they don't have to be big, they don't have to be contrived, they don't have to be long thought out or planned. They can just be in the moment, and they can just be the smallest of things. And I think the thing that we should seek, we so often seek the goal, the end outcome, and I'm all for that. I'm absolutely all for that. But at the end of the day, what if life isn't a series of these moments? And what if we could just have more of these magical moments more of the time? And so for me, focusing on those magical moments and how we can create those for others. And you said it at the beginning, it's a real gift to you get something from that as well. So it's not a one-way street. So yes, make the most of those moments.
In this episode, Rachel and I discuss so many different things, and yet there's one thing that underpins all of it, and that is emotional intelligence. And if you want a reliable, valid and objective way of assessing your emotional intelligence, or the emotional intelligence of your colleagues or your team, then E-Factor is the way to go. The only assessment of emotional intelligence that looks at the combination of self-report 360 and an objective assessment of knowledge, understanding and skills of emotional intelligence. So if you want to know just how emotionally intelligent you or your colleagues or your team are, then E-Factor is what you need. Get in touch with us today on hello@emotionalwork.co.uk to find out how you can assess your own and others' emotional intelligence. For now, back to the show.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. So if our listeners wanted to get hold of you, and if they wanted to ask you something more, what would be a good way for people to get in touch?
So if something here has resonated, I would love for your listeners to get in touch. The best way to reach me would be on LinkedIn. It's really lovely to know that someone has listened into the show, and it would just be great to connect. If you've not heard already in the show, I love to connect. So I would love someone to. I would love you to reach out and to let me know. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Rachel Edmondson Clark, and if in doubt, just put the extra letters in the name because I've got all of them. So yes. Rachel AEL, Edmund Son, and Clark with the E. Yeah, there's not many of us around.
Oh, wonderful, fabulous. I love that. All of the extra letters. I have a similar thing with L's, so I've got 2 L's in Philip and 2 L's in Wilcox. So all of the L's for me.
Well, there we go. We have that in common. I love it.
Have that in common. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Okay, all right. In which case, then, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your thinking, for being really open, for being really quite, if I may say, vulnerable in terms of the experiences that you've had and how that felt and what's happened for you at different moments through your time. And thank you so much, for sharing that with us and with the listener. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And so in closing then, is there something else or something more that you are thinking, feeling, or would like to say?
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned in all of this is that it's not just about mindset. So please look after yourself physically too. And I just want to say thank you, Phil, because I've been able to share what I have because of the space that you create. So it's been really wonderful, and I've loved talking to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Right. In that case, then, we'll bring the podcast to a close. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, however long may be left for you. And if you can, listen well to yourself and maybe to someone else as well.